God bless America. Hello, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege. This is the Protege program, and it is a fantastic day today. The tax reform bill went to President Trump's desk. He signed it. At least I believe that is the current state at the time of this recording. Regardless, the left is self-destructing. The saying goes, when your enemy is killing himself, don't stop him to point it out. But I can't resist. We'll be looking at a lot of Twitter things, a lot of things that people have been saying on Twitter. I've been refreshing the homepage over at Twitchy every few minutes, and it just continues to pile on. This isn't even the earliest story from Twitchy that I saw. This is on something that AT&T is going to do before, or as a result of the tax plan, I guess I should say. So we're being told leading up to the passage of this bill that allowing businesses to have more money is bad because they just sit on it. And I talked about this a little bit in previous videos, how it's actually bad for businesses to sit on piles of money. If you don't spend your money investing in your business, then you're not going to be competitive in the free market. And lo and behold, what does AT&T do? But I believe it's AT&T that sends out the tweet, or maybe it's just a news bulletin from this fellow Steve Kopak. AT&T announces it will pay a special $1,000 bonus to more than 200,000 AT&T U.S. employees because of the tax reform package, and will also increase U.S. capital spending. That means investing in their businesses in the United States by $1 billion. So AT&T gets a tax break, and what do they do with the money? Well, they, first of all, immediately give a bunch of it to their employees. $1,000 times 200,000 employees. Help me out with that math. I believe that is $200 million that AT&T is going to give away in bonuses, in wages that aren't taxed like your regular wages, I think is the way that translates. $200 million that they're going to give away because of a tax break. How is this? I defy any leftist to say that tax breaks for companies are bad for average Americans. CNBC is even reporting on the announcement by AT&T, and the Twitterverse is reacting with a right-leaning reaction, I suppose you could say. At least that's what Twitchy is reporting. I believe, based on the way that they've been reporting on the Twitter activity of the past few hours, that they are a right-leaning website, but I don't mean that as an insult. The way that the left says right-wingers, they mean it to be an insult. But when I say that Twitchy is a right-leaning website, I mean that so far it looks like they like to tell the stories of the people that are spreading the news of the rights policies and libertarian policies. So that was the first Twitter drama I wanted to look at. The next one is from Boeing. So first AT&T decides they're going to pay their employees bonuses because of the tax break. And Boeing apparently decides it's going to do so as well. Boeing announces a $300 million employee-related and charitable investment as a result of tax reform legislation to support our heroes, our homes, and our future. Not as much detail in the Boeing announcement, but if AT&T is anything to go off of, then there's probably a big chunk of Boeing's employees, probably a couple of 100,000 employees, that Boeing is going to give $1,000 apiece to as a year-end bonus, and probably do some sort of fund donation, probably $100 million donation or $50 million donation to a charitable organization. This is what companies are doing with the money that they're getting to keep due to this tax break. Again, I defy anyone on the left to explain to me how this is bad, how a tax break for companies that's causing them to give money away. Not only are the average Americans getting tax breaks from the government, but it appears that many of their employers are going to give them big bonuses because of these tax breaks. Again, I defy any leftist to explain to me how this is a bad thing. We're just going to keep rolling because this doesn't really slow down. Senator Sanders and Warren are taking their marching orders from another senator. Actually, I'm going to do that one first. Let's throw those away because we're done looking at those. So this was the first story that I pulled from Twitchy, and after I saw this one, I was refreshing the page and seeing more and more. This was the first one. So a senator from Oregon by the name of Brandon Morse. No, that's wrong. Senator from Oregon, name of Jeff Merkley, decided he would tweet this about the tax break. GOP just pulled off the biggest bank heist in U.S. history, and they're delivering the loot. And it's not $1 trillion out of the national treasury, it's $1.5 trillion to the wealthiest Americans and big corporations. Now remember, the big corporations are not just sitting on this money. They're giving a lot of it away. AT&T and Boeing, the first two, and I'm sure there will be more that Twitchy will be reporting on in the hours and days to come. But from the perspective of Senator Merkley, the money that we pay in taxes isn't actually ours. The money that we pay in taxes is actually U.S. Treasury dollars that they give to us in order to say that we're paid so much money that then they take back so that they can spend it on stuff. Explain to me how that is reality. So Senator Merkley is the first one that I know of to tweet about this bank heist analogy. And apparently, Senator Sanders and Warren have been tweeting similar things. Elizabeth Warren, the tax bill that Republicans jammed through the Senate tonight isn't tax reform, it's a heist. And Bernie Sanders, what we are seeing today is, in an unprecedented way, is the looting of the federal treasury. So three senators within an hour, I believe, of each other, all tweeting about how the GOP is looting and committing some kind of heist against the federal treasury. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if the media tonight is talking all about the big heist that's been pulled off against the federal government by the GOP tax reform. And it's bad enough that senators and the left that is visible on Twitter is talking in these terms about tax reform. But apparently there are some on the left that are pining for an economic recession, or at least for the economy to have a hangover of sorts. This fellow, Douglas Gillison, over at AFP, they appear to be a foreign website, a blog of some kind. I don't know how Yahoo News decided they deserved to be on their page. I don't know. But this fellow begins to write about some of the history to the big tax cuts that Republicans have passed. And he talks about the Reagan tax cuts of the 80s and the Bush tax cuts of the turn of the century. And he says this here. But if history is any guide, some economists say... Oh, hold on. I just thought of this. Is history saying that fiscal realities could soon force the tax plan's proponents to eat their words? Or are leftist economists saying that fiscal realities could force tax plan proponents to eat their words? It looks like he's trying to cite two authoritative sources in the same sentence, and I just read it as janky there for a second. In past decades, policymakers have reversed major cuts as deficits ballooned and economic windfalls failed to materialize. But that's not the real reason that policymakers reverse decisions on tax cuts, as you will see. The real reason that these reversals happen is, as he cites in this little one-sentence paragraph, major tax cuts enacted in 1981 and again in 2001 and 2003 ultimately suffered U-turns as policymakers faced a worsening fiscal outlook and politically unpalatable spending cuts. And that is the real problem. The real problem is that spending cuts are politically unpalatable. I don't know how we got here. I haven't been alive long enough to know how we've got here. But reducing spending by the federal government in any terms has somehow become obscene, has somehow become haram, is somehow unallowable, is somehow catastrophic, somehow Armageddon, by the very nature of a spending cut. I'm sure that you all will remember the sequester that happened, and I don't remember the year that it happened now, but it was, I want to say it was right before the 2012 elections. It was after the Republicans took control of the House at the latest. But it was before 2015. No, it was after the Republicans took control of the House at the earliest, but before 2015 at the latest. I'm not sure. That's somewhere between 2011 and 2014. But the sequester was this evil thing. Everybody was crying and shrieking about it. The media was throwing a hissy fit. It was going to be the biggest disaster. It was after 2012. Or maybe it was during 2012. I'm remembering now, I didn't pay as much attention to politics from 2008 to 2012 as I have since 2012. So it was after 2012. Maybe late in 2011 that the sequester happened. The sequester was a broad, sweeping spending cut that was supposed to end the world. The sequester was going to happen because of the Republicans, even though it was Obama's idea. The sequester was going to happen, and it was because of Republicans, and the world was going to come to an end because the government was going to spend, and it was something on the order of a few $100 billion less, which in the world of trillions of dollars in debt is nothing. The government was going to spend a few $1 billion less, and the world was going to come to an end. But the sequester happened, and nobody died. The airplanes didn't fall from the sky. The trains ran on time, which means late when it comes to trains. Gas was still delivered to the gas stations. The pumps continued to work. Nobody's computers stopped working. Spending cuts are not as catastrophic as somehow they have come to be believed. And this is why debt continues to increase. Deficit spending continues to happen even after tax cuts, is because spending cuts are unacceptable. And it doesn't make tax cuts bad that society or the political sphere believes that spending cuts are bad. It's just a warped view that the swamp has of spending. The swamp believes that it is entitled to spend as much money as they have been spending, and not a penny less. The swamp doesn't want to spend less money, but the swamp is more than willing to do some tax cuts that it knows full well it's going to have to undo when the financial crises happen, like happened in the state of Kansas. You remember I mentioned this recently. The state of Kansas had a big budget crisis recently. The state of Oklahoma is going through some similar things, having some budget crises. But the state of Kansas had a big, huge budget crisis. They enacted sweeping tax cuts across the state, across the board, and then had budget shortfalls because they didn't touch their spending. And now Oklahoma is starting to have some of these same problems. Oklahoma is starting to have to address the budget. They're starting to have to look at the budget and say, okay, we're going to have to cut some things. And the reason that spending cuts are so bad in the eyes of the public, this is not in the eyes of the DC swamp, by the way, in the eyes of the public, is because of the places that the swamp goes to begin cutting spending. I believe, I'm starting to put the pieces together in my mind as I think about this. I think that this is how DC and the political elites managed to engineer making government spending this enshrined, protected thing that it is. Whenever it comes time to cut spending, where are the places that the elites start? Not the places that they say, we're not going to touch this for now. Where do they start cutting spending? They start at entitlement programs. They start at outreach programs, programs that are designed for the poor and the downtrodden. They start at education. They start at the programs and services that the government renders that arguably do good, in some cases quantifiably do good. They start there. Instead of saying, we're going to save this for last and we're not going to touch it unless we have to, no, they start at those places. And because they start at those places, that's where the media starts, and they start fear-mongering. Whenever spending cuts come up, where's the first place everybody jumps to mentally? Entitlements. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education. The children are all going to become stupid, as if that hasn't already happened, because we're going to stop spending money. And there's no examination allowed to be made of where these dollars are going or what their results are being. We're not even allowed to examine the more unknown spending parts of the federal government. The parts of spending that could be easily pointed to and said, okay, these are dollars we don't have to spend. No, we hide those dollars under Medicare, Medicaid, under entitlement programs. That's how we avoid cutting spending. And I've spent a lot more time talking about that than I initially intended to, but I think it was a good discussion. I think I began putting some of the pieces together on how we're not allowed to make spending cuts anymore. So, just to sum up, the tax cuts are not bad. Let me put it this way. Deficit spending and the increase in the national debt is not fully the fault of the tax cuts. It is more the fault of the spending problem that is running rampant through the federal government. State governments also deal with this problem, but the federal government has no real system in place right now to hold its spending in check. And because of the way that spending cuts are spun in the media and the manner in which government starts tackling the spending problem, they start with the untouchable dollars. Welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc. Because of that, we're not allowed to touch spending. And since we're not allowed to touch spending, then deficit spending and debt going up gets turned to the other part of the equation, revenue, which translates into taxes. I hope I wrapped that up in a bow for you because I want to move on. This is the last thing that I want to talk about in this segment, because Gary Cohn of Goldman Sachs pointed out something at a Wednesday Axios event. And I think that this is something that we need to remember. This is something that we need to pay attention to as we move forward with this tax cut now becoming the law of the land. Cohn said the Reagan tax cuts were followed by other countries also lowering their rates, thus reducing the effectiveness of the Reagan tax cuts. This would be a failure if we don't capitalize on our competitive opportunity and let the rest of the world catch up to us. What Cohn is saying, something that I didn't know, I wasn't old enough to remember the Reagan tax cuts, is that apparently if the U.S. economy doesn't move fast enough with these new tax cuts, we could find ourselves in a situation where instead of being on a competitive level with the world, the rest of the world just lowers their tax rates and cuts our legs out from under us. I don't know how likely that is to happen in this day and age. Certainly, the rest of the Western world is much more leftward leaning, much more socialistic than it used to be, than it was back in the 80s. I think that this is much less of a danger today, comparatively speaking to history, but I think that it is something we need to keep our eyes on. If the economy fails to move with enough haste that the rest of the world is allowed to catch up to us, as Cohn points out here, we could be seeing really short-term economic growth. Now, I'm not sure how the quantities of these tax cuts would impact businesses. Coming from 35 to 21% of a corporate tax rate is a big, big difference. But I'm not sure what going from a 20% tax rate to a 10% tax rate would do. Obviously, that's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars for big multinational businesses. But perhaps for some businesses that aren't in the hundreds of millions of dollar range, it wouldn't be worth the trouble to expand. I think that I don't know enough about these kinds of things to say definitively whether or not we do have to seriously watch this. So I do think it is something to keep in mind as we move forward. That's all that I have to say at this time. Thank you so much for watching. You'll be watching this video on Thursday, so make sure that you hit subscribe and ring the bell for notifications so that you don't miss tomorrow's video. It's going to be the last video before we go into the Christmas weekend. I do intend to have videos going up on Christmas Day and the day after, even though I will not be in my office on those 2 days. So make sure you don't miss out. Subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Until next time, good night and God bless.